Alright, here's a short lecture on styles of writing testing assessment reports. There are three basic models for writing these types of reports. One would be test-oriented, or they could be domain-oriented, or hypothesis testing, and I will explain each one of these. A test-oriented format, historically this is the most popular way of doing it. What you do is you go test by test, you list significant results without a whole lot of comparing and contrasting of the results. So the advantage of this style is that it's pretty clear where your data is coming from, the source of it, but the disadvantage of it is that this style focuses on the tests and not the clients, and the data are not integrated at all. So you don't really get the big picture with this style. Another type is domain-oriented, and in this style, the results are grouped according to abilities or functioning domains. So you might have separate paragraphs for topics such as intellectual ability, interpersonal skills, psychosocial stressors, how they cope with things, what motivates them, things like that. Now the advantage of this type of model is that it lets you cover a lot of different types of domains. It's also useful if you're doing a cross-battery assessment. For example, what I find is when I do a special education assessment in school, a lot of my test data overlaps with information that the speech and language person gathers, or somebody who's doing achievement testing might gather. So if you report results according to domain, it makes it easier to integrate different tests. And that way you don't have to look around in different places to get similar types of information. The disadvantage of this type of test is that there may be more information that's presented than is really relevant to what the referral question was to begin with. Information that's helpful that you might want to highlight could get lost among other details. A third way of reporting results is a hypothesis testing model, and this would be that the results are focused on possible answers to referral questions. The data are presented systematically to support or refute the hypothesis, and tests are rarely mentioned by name. If you read medical reports, you find that they frequently use this type of model. Doctors don't usually give a whole lot of data or detail about how they reach their conclusions or what the results, say, of lab tests or x-rays were. So this is an efficient and pretty concise way to focus on a referral question. There's no distraction from irrelevant details, but it may leave out useful information that's not related to the referral issue. That's another thing I notice with medical type reports, is that doctors tend to be pretty linear in their approach in terms of cause and effect, and they often don't look at the big picture or the contextual factors. But a lot of times, though, that information can tell you a lot about a person's functioning. Now the purposes for having reports, one might be to answer a specific question, or treatment planning would be another one, like what are the person's issues, what is their baseline functioning, monitoring progress, okay, we've applied this intervention, what are we seeing now in terms of outcomes. It can provide diagnostic input, like I said, it could clarify some diagnostic information, and it can be used to assess therapy outcomes. So, often what happens is that there's initial testing, but sometimes there's not additional kinds of assessments that happen along the way. The different parts of an assessment report. Reports are organized a lot like a journal research article would be. So the referral question is kind of like the hypothesis, or it's the here's what we want to find out, here's what we're wondering about. So a referral question will state the purpose of the evaluation and organizes the rest of the report. For the purposes of your self-evaluation you're going to write, for the referral question, you can just say that it's a requirement for the course, or it's for personal exploration, or whatever. The goal of the report is to reach a logical conclusion that answers the referral questions and supported by valid, reliable data. So 3 sources of data. One would be clinical history, and that's kind of like the background section or the lit review of a research paper. Behavioral observations, and also the actual testing. So the testing would be like the data part of a research paper. So some stylistic considerations should be concise and only include details that are relevant to your conclusion. A lot of times when students write like the background history section, they write it as if it were an autobiography or a resume, and that's usually more detailed than people want to read in reports. It really is important for reports to be tightly written with only information that's really relevant to the referral question. The purpose of a report is not usually to provide a comprehensive history. Another stylistic consideration would be not to include too many qualifiers like appears to, suggests, reportedly. These types of things can sort of slow down the reading and sort of disqualifies your conclusions. You can make a statement saying that the tests don't give you the whole picture. You can make validity statements about the tasks as you report the results, but then you shouldn't kind of carry that on that style and be very tentative about your results. People who are consumers of test information usually do understand that they're not perfect measures. Another stylistic consideration is to be specific in your language. Use behavioral descriptions with specific behaviors. So rather than saying something like, this person has a conflict in dealing with authority figures, give evidence. For example, he has been expelled from school on 3 occasions, arrests, conflict with bosses, those kinds of things. So that's getting down to specifics, because there are a lot of different ways to be in conflict with authority figures. That's subject to interpretation, but if you give specifics, that removes the ambiguity. In general, avoid vague comments, like, for example, you wouldn't just say the client improved with therapy. You would state how they improved. There was a real change in their mental status. They started taking better care of themselves, started taking more risks, that kind of thing. Other stylistic considerations, avoid jargon and write for the intended audience. So any real technical terms, you should not assume. The other thing is, you shouldn't, when you write about test results, even if you're writing for another professional person, you shouldn't assume that they are familiar with a particular test that you're talking about. So you should always include a little bit, very brief introduction of the test and what it measures. Sometimes it's recommended to use a passive voice, third person versus personal pronouns in a report. In other words, you instead of referring to yourself directly, like the client met me and we, that kind of thing. Sometimes people write in a style where they'll say the examiner met the client, and the idea behind it is that writing in the third person is a way of making the results sound a little bit more objective. I will leave it up to you how you want to do this stylistically. Other people do use the first person and find it less stilted, to actually say I did this instead of the examiner did this. A third way would be to avoid references to yourself. So instead of using language like the client was angry at me, you could say the client voiced frustration and hostility. So I'll leave it up to you what format you want to use for the testing and what writing style you want to use for the testing. Don't be too informal in your writing, and try to use a professional voice in your writing. The other thing that I would mention would be that you don't have to use APA style for writing a report. One typically does not use citations and things like that. So really the format of it is pretty much up to you. Another thing I would suggest would be when you're reporting your results, I think tables and things like that are a pretty concise way of reporting the results. It makes it easy for people to take in and saves you a lot of narrative writing. So that would be another suggestion that I would make for your report. And that is all I have to say about report writing styles and formats.